I would like now to welcome to the stage Stephen Mifsud, Artem Buerov, and Sarah, please. Unfortunately, you're still stuck with me as moderator. Is Sarah here? She is, she is. Come, Sarah, welcome. Yeah, sorry. Siobhan was unable to, believe it or not, Siobhan's coach wouldn't let her come. That is the God's honest truth. I don't know whether she's not training hard enough or what it is. Right, so welcome to our panel on diversity and inclusion. I should just point out that Stephen is audially impaired, so I will be facing him quite a lot because he'll be reading my lips. So that and any questions from the floor I'll be repeating for that reason. Right, so we have a very, very interesting and experienced panel with us. I will allow, or I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves and sort of explain what qualifies you to be sitting on this panel and talking about diversity and inclusion.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Mifsud. I am the CEO of Direct AXA, which is a access consultancy, and we work with major events. We worked with London 2012, and more recently, my post was director of accessibility at Expo 2020 in Dubai.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Artem, ICSD project manager. So I'm the part of the ICSD family for the last 3 years, mainly dealing with the event operation, administrative stuff, and my passion is anti-doping. I believe not a lot of people in this auditorium are familiar with the acronym ICSD. So who we are? We are International Committee of Sport for the Deaf, Lausanne-based organization, with 100-century history in the past, by the way. We are the significant part of the Olympic family, IOC recognized. Speaking about the numbers, so and what we do, so we have 2 major events, Summer and Winter Deaflympics, and we are in charge with the World Deaf Championships. So 21 summer sports, 7 winter sports, so that's already impressive. So we have lots of athletes globally, 120 countries, so under our umbrella. And so going to the recent success, so 20 days ago we completed the Summer Games in Brazil, so that attracted 2,700 athletes from 73 countries. That's really a good result for us. Speaking about inclusion and diversity, so that's our constitution states that we are obliged to promote equality through sport. We don't want anybody to stay behind, and yeah, we do our best to increase the awareness of disability. Thank you.
So Sarah was a last-minute recruit, so we didn't have time to chat, but I know that she's more than capable of thinking on her feet. So, but I just think we have to credit her for just turning up at the last minute. So thank you, Sarah.
Pleasure, and good morning, everybody. I won't repeat my profile that I presented to you yesterday. Even though we have some newcomers here, you can see it on LinkedIn, on my website, and welcome to all new contacts. It's great to interact, not only here during this excellent MEI Hosts and Federations Summit, but also out with that, and we can learn more about each other and our activities and how we can commonly support each other. I would like to say that when it comes to diversity and inclusion, in the past, I would have said I represent the other 50%. But I don't think that this is the case any longer. And I even had to apologize yesterday, Andy, because our panel that we presented best practice, the way forwards for events and cities and co-partnering was not diverse. We had 3 women in the platform, but rather interestingly, I had several people approach me in the evening afterwards who said, we didn't notice, that didn't occur to us. And that for me is the first sign of gender blindness, that everybody cares about the quality of the session and not just about what gender, what potential, and I don't like to call it a disability, I'm sorry, it's other ability. It's other ability, because there are certain advantages with being, let's say, selectively deaf, which I think we can all say we use, I won't say suffer from, I would say use as appropriate. I did get permission from my coach this morning to attend today's panel. Andy, back to you.
I'm pleased that you did, Sarah. And the day that I'm criticised for having too many women on a panel, I will open a bottle of champagne, because I am regularly criticised for not having enough women. So we are working incredibly hard to balance that gender side of things, and we're definitely getting there. So it's interesting that you felt that it wasn't diverse because there were only women. I'd like to pick up on what you were saying about that term disability. I stand on a soapbox as well about that. Dubai gets an awful lot wrong, but what it does get right, in my opinion, is calling disabled people people of determination, which is a term which I would encourage all of you to start using. Stephen, I know you've got a view on this as well.
Absolutely. We need to give disabled people tools to feel empowered. Now, if you get the term disability, likewise, I do not like the term either. Because if you break that term, it's actually disability. So are we saying that disabled people are disabled people? So in Dubai, they use the term people of determination. And that makes disabled people feel so empowered. And when I went to Dubai for the first time, when somebody referred to me as a person of determination, I felt important. I felt great. Absolutely.
It's like musical chairs with the, with the microphones. Artem, do you want to add to that? Have you got any thoughts as far as, the terms for deaf people?
So it's a great question, and this is a great problem, I would say, because, yeah, so for me, there is no existing barriers for people with a disability of determined people. Because I know, I'm a part of this business for 3 years officially, but so I started volunteering in 2013, and I know all the names. I know almost 10,000 athletes, and for me, what they're doing, so the way how they perform, and what are the obstacles on the level of the training, how to communicate to coaches, it is just incredible.
Sarah?
I actually had the privilege to grow up with an athlete who was himself deaf, and he was an outstanding sportsman. I had the opportunity to tell this to Stephen yesterday. Crawford Carrick-Anderson was an alpine skier, member of the British development team, and his sister actually, when I was alpine director, reached the top 10 in the world, 8th in the world championships, and now mother of 2 aspiring, extremely talented young alpine skiers. But Crawford was not only a fantastic alpine skier, he was also a Scottish national swimmer and cyclocross, motocross. He was really outstanding. But the influence that he had on the athletes with him in that group taught them to be so much more empathetic, of course, as well as learning sign language, which was fantastic for them, another quality to have. But the way that they were able to interact with him and have I believe, a much better tolerance in terms of how to manage athletes with another ability. For those of you who had the privilege to attend, well, any of the Paralympics, for me, a turning point in my attitude to athletes with other abilities was the London 2012 Games. And when I saw wheelchair rugby, wheelchair basketball, the way that, I mean, this absolutely describes athletes, persons of determination. Because I can tell you that there are not too many of us prima donnas who would just get back into our chairs, as it were, be assisted, but assisted in a, I would say, a fairly physical and relatively tough way back into our chairs, and then go head to head again, and absolutely outstanding.
I would just like to add about the Paralympics. When we had London 2012 and we held the Paralympics, yesterday we were talking about legacy. For me, legacy is now about seeing inclusive sporting facilities throughout the UK. We now have changing places bathrooms with a hoist, height adjustable bench. We now accept within the UK that disabled people should and must be able to participate in sport just as equally as the next person. I would just like to also add, when you mentioned gender blind, we must not confuse accessibility and inclusion. They are two different things. Accessibility is about providing facilities for disabled people. Inclusion is about not seeing that there is segregation. So at the moment, the way society is, I apologise if I'm going off topic. You can tell me off.
No, this is absolutely bang on topic.
Okay, so at the moment where society is, we have a disabled bathroom, able-bodied person bathroom. We have a wheelchair section in this auditorium. Wouldn't it be great if future sporting events were inclusive for everybody and we had one toilet for everybody, one auditorium that is accessible for everybody? That is inclusion, and gender blind is exactly where I hope we go. Disability blind. Thank you.
Brilliant. Artem, do you have anything to add to that? And with a specific focus on the deaf and the challenges that they face, both as fans and also as athletes. Because what's interesting here is obviously we would love to feel that, you know, sport was inclusive for all, not just in terms of participation, but in terms of engaging with it.
So that's a good question. And let's just imagine that we finish this panel and we're going outside and we just cross a person and we just say hi. And we get no response for that. And they say, like, what's wrong? So what is this? You're a bit confused. And this is the main challenge of deaf people, because this is the invisible part of it. So you see the physically healthy person and you don't understand what is behind this. And second, and also kind of a big challenge, it is the linguistic one, because not a lot of people are aware, so that each country has a dedicated sign language that deaf people use as the communicating tool. So from Germany, so from Great Britain, and only few countries, I would say few, it is Great Britain, it is America, and strangely enough Russia, has recognized this language as the official one. And this makes a kind of barrier for the rest of the countries and for the deaf people in other countries, because they have the certain limits for education, first of all. So people just can't be educated, they don't have schools physically. In the case of athletes, what is really a challenge for them, it is the access to the trainers, to the coaches, to the medical personnel. And this is, so that makes me just amazed, because these people come above these barriers and they succeed. So they're medalists and they have a lot of people. But what is a good point in this case, because we're in 2022, so we have technologies that help us to bridge this and to leave these barriers. And what is more important, we have SDGs, so that is finally put this issue on the spotlight. So we're speaking about the diversity, we're speaking about the inclusion, which is good. And plus we have the IPC big program with the 15. It's also an interesting fact, 1.2 billion people globally have any sort of disability. 1.7, yeah, so sorry, it's a statistic of that they announced. We're the partners, and this is really makes sense, so that we have such program that really identify this and so try to solve and to help people.
So Sarah, asking you to cast your mind back to the time when you were running the Ski Federation, I know that you're passionate about this area. So what was the one thing that you did there that you're most proud of in the area of diversity and inclusion?
I tried to serve myself as a role model for other women to demonstrate that why should 50% of the world's population not be competent and capable of actually performing similar tasks? Because that's what it's about at the end of the day. I didn't want to be selected, chosen, included in a panel. Andy reached out today, for example, just because I am a woman, but because I'm a woman with the necessary qualities as Stephen, as Artem, to be able to deliver to you an engaging session. And not only to fulfill that myself, but also as I was able to progress and integrate into, let's say, mainstream acceptance of then a society that was absolutely male-dominated. Myself and Debbie Jevons from the then International Tennis Federation were the Lone Rangers, that we were able to be able to encourage, to mentor, and to demonstrate that we're normal people. And let's do that. And then we implemented within the International Ski Federation, which was prehistoric when it came to having an attitude. How do we really encourage that? With a sport that was gender balanced, relatively gender balanced. There are countries where the women's team is far more followed than the men's team. It depends on the eras, but as we know, it's all about the stars. So within the media, the coverage in some countries was very much focused on their women superstars, an era with the German ski team in Germany, where alpine skiing exploded thanks to a woman, Rosie Mittermeier, and periods in the USA, like at present, where the women absolutely dominate in Sweden and other countries too. Andy, I'll get to the point. But we then...
That isn't why I was looking at my watch, honestly, Sarah.
We also saw that basically within the leadership of the Federation, within the governing bodies, here there is some proactive measures that are required. And when it came to, I would say, the non-elected positions where it was possible to appoint them, I was able to do a lot of good work behind the scenes to motivate them, to give them confidence that stand in the front, be great. Don't just accept that you should be the secretary of the committee. Automatically, the woman in the room, you're the secretary of the committee. Yes, you are the best one, no question, but this is seen as a lower position than being the vice chair of the group or being the chair of the group. And so I was able to influence a lot and promote a lot the qualities of different women to be able to execute those functions and then gain support within their national associations to be proposed as such. When it came actually to the elected ruling body, the council, that was a different story. And that took really some efforts. And we put in place, thanks to collaboration with the IOC, with ASOIF, General Assembly going on today, with their seminars that take place on gender equality, gender balance, to then implement the high five to gender equality, which was basically a series of 5 concrete measures over 5 years to step by step reach that gender balance. I regret to say that it seems to have stalled somewhat for the last 18 months, but nevertheless, hopefully it's on track. They did elect 3 compulsory women to the Council of the International Ski Federation last week of 18, and they will demonstrate their competence without any shadow of doubt. But it's a case of a certain transition when it actually comes to the leadership within the national associations, that there are more presidents at a national level who will then be proposed in those roles. And I will continue to mentor, to support, and one of the things going forwards is I would like to support women's leadership campaigns and to consult and advise you on a pro bono basis, and let's see where we go from there. And come on, put your hand up, go for it.
I love that. Evangelizing as ever, and quite rightly so. If we can move away from the area of gender equality and get back to the area of people of determination, and again, moving away from deafness, because we're slightly overweighted on the panel. Stephen, your company looks at or advises on a whole range of accessibility issues. What 3 pieces of advice would you give to an international sports federation in the room to be cognizant of that particular target audience or that particular area, both in terms of supporting athletes, the talent, and also supporting fans? So three pieces of advice.
That is a great question, and it's going to give me great pleasure to answer that. And consider accessibility straight from the earliest possible stage. I see so many events where opportunities are not maximized because they haven't considered accessibility from day one. For an example, Expo 2020, a lot of the accessibility has to be retrofitted after it. Second thing, we need to consider accessibility and inclusion, not just for the visitors, but also the athletes and the volunteers and the staff. Because we've spoken a lot about sustainability. Now, volunteers, getting disabled people to volunteer and then they can get jobs. It gives them confidence. That is a really sustainable model. The third thing, pardon me, is you need to consider everything about accessibility, not just the physical environment. You need to think about the digital environment, the sensory environment, the physical environment, and the social environment. So the physical is the accessibility of the structure. The digital environment, a lot of people forget about. 80% of disabled people will assess the accessibility of a venue before visiting. You can have the most accessible sporting event. However, if on your website and your app you do not talk about the accessibility, you've lost them. You've lost 80%. And then the social environment, we need to think about the staff awareness, the training, and making sure that that's all really streamlined. So, for instance, security, X-ray machine, people who have a cochlear implant like myself, they can't go through an X-ray machine. How do we remove the embarrassment and the stigma of going through the machine and causing people to queue up behind the deaf person when they're trying to explain in a different language? What we did at Expo 2020 is we brought over the sunflower lanyard, which is a hidden disability lanyard, and we taught the staff this person required additional assistance. That's all they need to know. They don't need to know the person had a vision impairment, is deaf, is autistic. That person had additional requirements. So those are the three advice.
Brilliant, and very concise, exactly what I was looking for. Artem, being the deaf czar, if we consider you the deaf czar, or the audio impaired czar, what one piece of advice would you give to the federations in the room about how they could be more considerate to that audience, that area?
I would say to be open-minded, and I would say to steer straight to the quality, because now, all these disability stories, all the inclusion and diversity, it is the main topic of many federations and really on the top of, and we created a lot of projects. But so this is exactly the moment when we're speaking not about the quantity, but we have to think about the quality. So and it is our job, so to lift these barriers and to secure our athletes and to understand, so what are the issues and what are the challenges of the athletes, determined one.
But if you're an event organizer, what can you do to be more sympathetic to deaf people? What can you do to be more supportive in order to support them in a stadia or an event? Maybe, Stephen, maybe you want to take that one, being deaf yourself.
I have my perception, if you don't mind. Include disabled people as part of the thought process. So get disabled people as part of the discussions in how the event's going to be run. And, let them give you the answer. It doesn't make any sense to run a game, sporting event, an Olympics, when you don't have disabled people as part of the thought and thinking process.
And obviously this is exactly the same argument, which is getting women into more stakeholder, more C-suite roles, because there is a different way of thinking. You just can't empathise enough if you haven't gone through that journey. Sarah, moving to you, and again your experience.
I'd just like to say one more thing. I'm just going to interrupt. When you invite disabled people to be part of the process, one very important question to ask is, how would you like to be involved? Many disabled people may not want to be part of the process in the traditional forms of sitting round a meeting room. You may have a deaf person that needs a sign language interpreter. You may have somebody who's autistic who would rather do it via a video screen. So we must ask people, would you like to be involved? If yeah, how would you like to be involved? The how is so important.
Brilliant, love it. Sarah, going back to you and your experience with the FIS, what is the best thing that you think any federation has done in order to pioneer the area of exclusivity and minimizing diversity, inclusivity, and minimizing and maximizing diversity?
Slightly different from the question that you told me you were going to ask, but in terms of thinking the best example, there are a number of different examples, and I won't put my finger on it. I do think that the discussions that we had at the International Ski Federation, initially with the IPC president in the new Olympic building on the occasion of its opening in 2019, to include para skiing and snowboarding, para snow sports, within the organisation were a very important step, and that was not with the blessing of the leadership at the time, because the population of 1.7 billion, what isn't there to appreciate in that? And I think as companies, as federations, as organisations, it is such a large part of the population, as are women, that it just makes sense to include them as part of your thought process in order that they're considered. And nowadays, would you really build a house where you can't get a wheelchair through the door? It just doesn't make any sense at all, except for Bob the Builder, who has to rebuild it. Therefore, it's actually thinking about these things at the outset, and in order to do that, you need someone who knows all about it. You're not going to talk about being your social media coordinator to a 60-year-old. You've got to involve Gen Z. And it's exactly the same thing. Talk to the people who are qualified in order to do so, in order to deliver. And sponsors, commercial partners, broadcast, when they can see that you're responsible citizens and you're employing, you're engaging, you're appointing persons with other abilities, persons of other genders, and I want to really underline of ethnic diversity. We can work from anywhere these days, from anywhere. And that does mean you can appoint the best people. And that makes a huge difference, as opposed to a very narrow circle of people who are prepared to come and live at the foot of a mountain. It's 3 times the cost of living anywhere else. You up sticks 28 years ago, leave family, friends, any other connections, any other parts of your life behind you. But that's the condition under which you're running. And then when you are being considered to be promoted to be the director or the secretary general of the federation, which demands a huge commitment in terms of travel and things, there is a very clear discussion with you that you don't intend to start a family at your age, because if you were to do so, that would have major implications on your ability to perform your role. Doesn't exist anymore. That is absolutely the olden times. So I've lived through that and come out the better side, absolutely content with the decisions that I've made without any shadow of a doubt. But that's how it was then. And I would like to underline that society is different these days. And you as managers, as leaders, as really part of the thought process within your companies and your federations have got the chance to influence that and say, look, no one expects that it's a charity and you're to give the job to somebody just because they're a woman, just because they are deaf. But they expect to be judged on the fact that they can deliver what you ask for in the profile.
And you know what? Social media had given disabled people a voice. And beware of the voice, is what I will say.
Keep going. Keep going.
Oh, keep going.
I was just going to make a cry, death to misogyny. But keep going, keep going, keep going.
Okay, so as you said, social media had now given disabled people a voice to talk about their experiences. And that voice can make or destroy PR. I also would just like to add that the accessibility and inclusion of a sporting event doesn't just consider the actual event and venue. With Expo 2020, we considered the accessibility to start from home. So from home, from thinking about visiting to how they get to the airport, the plane, the airline, the hotel, from the hotel to the event. That's why we must consider the accessibility from day one. And I would just like to say as well, why spend the money on being accessible? What's the business case? Certainly, I can tell you, people who benefit from accessible need, families, elderly people. We have an aging population, especially with the pandemic and investment in medical care. Deaf people, 10% of the population have a hearing impairment. Autistic people, and anxious people. When you take into account all those people, that's probably 40–50% of the population. And another thing is with hotels, hotels would quite often say, why do we need to be inclusive? Oh, well, think about it. Disabled people are generally off-peak travellers. They get off-peak revenue. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got sort of 5–10 minutes. I'd love to open the floor for questions. There's a question here. I'm going to, if you could explain who you are and where you're from, and then specifically if you're directing the question to somebody, then add that in.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, Stephen and panel. My name is Clayton DaCosta, and I'm with a company called Portas Consulting. But Stephen, you might recognize me because prior to...
Can I stand up?
Sure, because prior to joining Portas, I was the Director of Planning for the United Arab Emirates for the Special Olympics, as well as the host pavilion at Expo 2020. So, very proud of your work and the work we collectively did together.
Thank you.
But, I love the fact you're using people of determination, which really is inspirational. But one of the things I'm particularly proud of from the event that we held in 2019 was using the event as a catalyst for changes in policy nationally, across the country. So my question to you, and indeed the panel, is how important do you think it is for governments and federations to actually look at the event in the future for doing similar things around diversity, inclusiveness, in areas that potentially haven't been considered in the city?
That's a massive question, so I don't know if you want to share it. I have an answer.
Can I give you an example that I think is so relevant? And this is not just to persons of a determination. The tube trains in London, although going on strike on Monday again, nevertheless, there would absolutely be no thoughts of having non-step-free access to reach the train. There's still some work required on reaching down to the train, but in general, you can do it. And as a traveller normally with a lot of baggage, but using the tube because it's the only affordable way to travel in London, it's... absolutely. Since 2012, no new tubes are built like that. Switzerland, please pay attention, because trying to actually climb on to still the majority of the intercity trains is actually jolly good. I used to live at a mountain for 28 years because it's like climbing the Matterhorn and dragging your bag up behind you, and that is not very funny, or bags.
So from the sport point of view, so it is of course important to hold a discussion with the government and to increase the awareness, to tell them so what are our needs. And at the part of the checklist, we check if the country is sustainable, if the country is really ready and aware what does it mean deaf sport. And it is the part of our legacy. Normally we have schools after us. So it means that we promote mostly the idea of the sign language. So we have a group of, so this is the part of our heritage after our games. So that's we are lifting the story. So who we are and what we're doing.
My answer is government, particularly in UAE, have signed up to the 17 Sustainable Goals. Major events like this are an absolute amazing opportunity to kickstart that. If you look at all those sustainable goals, diversity and inclusion are pretty much at the heart of it. Education for everybody, community for everybody, sports for all. So that is my answer. And I'd like to just say congratulations to the UAE on getting the next COP event.
Yeah, here. Another question? Thank you. I was hoping that you would pipe up. The microphone's coming, so if you could just introduce yourself, say where you're from, and whether or not the question is to the panel or anyone in specifically.
Good morning. I think it's still the morning. My name is Niti Sapaya, and I am from Virtus. We are the International Federation of Sport for athletes with an intellectual impairment. I guess it's a contribution and a question. The contribution is diversity and inclusion is all around us, so it's not hard to achieve. It's very easy to achieve. We just have to look. For Virtus, the hard part is our athletes do have a non-visible disability. So we call them intellectual impairment because it's not just a person with IQ under 75 or a person who recognizes themselves as Down syndrome or trisomy 23 or a person with autism. It's a huge spectrum. So diversity and inclusion in the Virtus world is about creating a world where everyone is included. And a lot of it will be social and sensory. So my question is, when, in my view, my personal view, it's easy to see the need for bigger, wider ramps, access to all ability toilets and facilities. But when we do come in a cohort where the invisible is more invisible, sorry, where the disability is more invisible, what else can we do? What are some of the steps that we should teach and raise awareness for people on how to see the invisible disabilities?
Can I make a very practical suggestion? Do you have an app, for example, that just gives on one screenshot a very clear information about the ability, the other ability, the particular factor of determination, let's say the limitations that they have, and what that exactly is. And that is connected to a translation platform that can be shown through DeepL in however many languages, or Google Translate or whatever. I am a celiac and have an allergy to gluten. And I have a restaurant card app where it shows in 57 languages. Now, when you're in the outer reaches of China, and I spent 8 months working for the Chinese Winter Sports Association, building up to and through the Beijing Games, that everything is served with soy sauce, and that is the absolute worst possible thing you can eat. But I was able to show and to share my screenshot with the chef, with the servers, with everybody there, and basically it saves my life. And I can do it all over the world in every possible language and for every condition that someone may have. So when you're connecting with a lot of people these days, yeah, they'll just Google it and say, oh, I get it, okay. When you're at that the security desk, or you're meeting up with a steward who says, are you deaf or something? Which unfortunately still exists. But it's for elderly people, it's for people who are a little bit older, who don't realize, oh, something I need to pay attention to here, that you can just show them that screenshot. And it makes all the difference in the world. It really does. Because it's comfortable, you don't have to explain anything. That I would really recommend for any sort of different condition that someone may have.
I would just like to add, you're absolutely right about the diverse, everybody different. I think as a society, everybody's unique. That's what makes us interesting. We should celebrate our differences, totally. And with the hidden disability, I can tell you from personal experience, having a hidden disability is one of the biggest barriers anyone can ever face. And very quickly, when I was little, I had a big hearing aid, a box, Imagine Darth Vader with wired and ear mode. People saw me coming, so they knew how to speak to me. As we developed technology, my hearing aid got smaller and smaller, and I now have a cochlear implant, which is tiny, which means I can hear better, but I'm actually struggling more because society don't know that I have an impairment. So when I approach people, they go, hello, you are, yeah. I'm like, hi, I'm deaf, I can't understand what you're saying. Quite often they'll go, no, you're not deaf. I'll say, let me reassure you, I am. So, and what we did for Expo 2020, we ran an event that had 24 million people within 6 months. During a pandemic as well, where deaf people couldn't communicate, everyone was wearing a mask.
Oh, yeah.
It was a nightmare. We considered using app, like with the phone, and that was one option. But we went back to basic, and we had a hidden disability lanyard. And that lanyard didn't have to, it's just a sunflower lanyard. It just says, I may or may not require assistance. Go easy on me. So I highly recommend that.
Stephen, can you give your microphone to the volunteer there, if you come and get it? So I'm going to ask a question now. If you give it to yeah, sorry. come and get it. Sorry, Stephen, that again, absolutely a case in point of me misunderstanding that. So sorry, I apologise. That was a massive blunder. So this is a question for Sanj and Leon and Clayton and the man up in the far road whose name I'm afraid I don't know. So if you give the microphone for Sanjeet, because I'm sure, no, Sanjeet, there you go. I'm sure he will have an answer for this. And this wasn't rehearsed, so I'm really putting him on the spot.
Yeah, no pressure.
So no pressure at all. So what is kind of embarrassing for me as this event organizer is the number of white faces in the room and how little racial diversity there is in here. So I will, you know, if you don't want to answer Leon, if you don't want to answer Clayton, I understand. But Sanj is a mate, so he doesn't mind me putting him on the spot. So what could we have done better? What can the world of sports organisers do better to try and balance the racial side of things?
What a massive question just to throw on someone who wasn't expecting it. I do have an answer, though.
I knew you would have.
One of the other things that I do is I lecture Masters of Sport Business at Loughborough University. So I do the Advanced Sponsorship course. And one of the things that I see there is a hugely diverse range of students. And it's really encouraging from all around the world, all races, ethnicities, everybody is there. There is, however, a disconnect between that student level and what we see in the upper echelons of sport business. Now, I fully believe that over a period of time, this will change. And I think if we held this event 20 years ago, this room would be pretty different, I think. So there is progression. The way to bridge that gap faster would be, and Andy, if you're asking specifically about this event, would be to be reaching out to those diverse students and making sure they are here and represented and hearing this, because the more we're educating them, the faster they will reach up through sport business and be present at these kind of events. Now, you can't always rush this stuff, but I do think this is trending in the right way. And the big benefit that I think diversity and inclusion is bringing to this, not just from the types of people, but types of background as well, is greater diversity of thought and the way that we approach problems. Because as some of you in the room already know, I wasn't originally from the sport industry. I was from e-commerce and technology. And I was very surprised at the sport industry when I first came across it. So having people from different backgrounds will help solve problems in a much faster way. Is that an okay answer?
That's a brilliant answer.
And Andy, could I add to that, please? So I introduce myself as a fruit salad. I have Indian Chinese heritage, grew up in New Zealand, and now live in Australia. So a fruit salad I am. In terms of that diversity, it's about the access to come. I'm grateful for MEI and Events Air, who sponsored my attendance here. But even walking through those doors, there's a hesitation. Am I good enough? Am I going to be able to contribute? Am I going to be the only colored woman in the room? Yes, no. These are not to say barriers per se, but environmentally, they create a process in people's minds. And so we do need to create a space that is welcoming. That is the accessibility. It's not for not wanting to be able to pay a ticket and come. That's not it at all. It's about the environment, the way that we are then welcomed in collectively, all of us.
Well, hopefully you feel welcomed.
I do, thank you.
Clayton, do you want to finish things up?
How do I follow that? No, look, what can I add to what's already been said? I think, increasingly, sport and major events are going to places in the world that they didn't normally, which actually over time will create the change. But I think, looking at the IOC with the Youth Olympic Games, the Commonwealth Games, increasingly you're getting more diversity in sport, coupled with the advent of technology, allowing people to collaborate across the world. I expect that to change over time. But you're right, there is a lot of work to do. Potentially to engage a new generation who are interested in the sport business side. And for, I don't need to speak to everyone in this room to understand, what the true nature of what it takes to deliver a major event. When I've led integrated operational planning or planning teams for major events, you're looking at 60 odd functions coming together, whether that's accreditation, catering, cleaning and waste. And I think as events start to go to greater geographic territories, as models of delivery change, hopefully we can start to engage people all over the globe, because the one thing that is a constant, as Nelson Mandela famously said, is the power of sport to unite. So I'm going to finish with that.
Perfect time to finish. So I would actually like to name check Cube International. I don't know whether you're aware of Cube. They are a multifaceted organization. They're launching an e-bike global series, but they also have some fantastic sustainability solutions. But they actually paid for Stephen's flight over here. So I think that they should just be given a little bit of credit for that. So hopefully you will thank the panelists for their time and insights. That didn't go terribly well, did it? That was sort of, gave you misaligned signals there. What we're going to do now is we're going to stop and have a break.